Why we should throw the Bible and ancient books away. Hey guys, it's John here in Akron, Ohio. It's 16 degrees outside. Snow is on the ground, and it looks like more snow is on its way. I'm sitting here drinking my beautiful glass of clear water, enjoying my day. And I wanted to hop on and talk about this topic because I watched a video this afternoon between one of my favorite YouTubers, Dan McClellan, responding to someone who was basically saying Dan McClellan was so wrong about something he said about something. And as I watched the video, it became very clear. It was very interesting, the argument back and forth, because Dan, very wise, very educated man on language of the time and the history of the time and where the biblical references come from. Very educated man in those topics. The other person was someone who thought they were very educated in the topics, but were more on the spiritual. You have to believe as I believe. I'm praying for your soul because you're being led astray, Dan, is what he was basically saying. As I sat and I listened to the reply from Dan to this guy's video, it was a very interesting argument because the guy was pulling up all these references, and he's saying, "Well, this book says this, book says this, and what you're saying in your stuff is wrong, and you're leading people astray." Dan is what he was saying, and Dan's response was, "Well, let's look at your sources." He starts going to the sources that the guy's coming from. And Dan's argument to me was kind of an interesting argument because Dan's argument was, well, the references that you are referring to that say kind of what you are saying are over 100 years old, so we really can't pay attention to them. And I thought, that's a really circular argument, because you're saying don't listen to those books because they're old. But the books that they're referring to are thousands of years older. So if you can't listen to those books because they're old, why should you listen to the first books that are thousands of years older? The only reason you would listen to the older books is because you've chosen an ideology. You've chosen a belief system. And it has nothing to do with the factual evidence. Now, Dan's argument was that, these guys in the 1800s didn't know what the scholars of now would be saying or believing. And, it doesn't match the scholarly work of today. Well, neither does the Bible. Neither does the Quran or any of them. They're all contemporary books of their time, speaking to the people of their time. William Shakespeare was a pop culture writer. There are so many things in his writing that in the time period they would have laughed at. Let me give you a really good example. The most misunderstood joke in Romeo and Juliet. There's a line where Mercutio is talking about Tybalt. And at one point he says, the immortal passado, the punto reverso, the hey. And then he kind of moves on, right? Well, it's interesting because when you look at that line, most people who do that play cut that line. But if I was living in the 1500s, in the 1600s, and I would have heard someone say, the immortal passado, the punto reverso, the hey, I would have laughed out loud. And the reason I would have laughed out loud was, number one, it was a reference to George Silver's book, The Paradoxes of Defense, where he mocked Italian people for their fighting styles. The immortal passado, the punto reverso, the hey. The immortal passado and the punto reverso, punto meaning thrust, reverso from the left. Passado is one foot passing the other in a fancy piece of sword footwork. So you'd have the passado passing forward, attacking, and the punto reverso, which is coming from the left side, both Italian fancy footwork. The hey, an English jumping dance, an English jumping dance. So that whole series, the Immortal Posado, the Punto Reverso, the Hey, is basically saying you Italians are just dancing around. And so in the time period, that would have been hysterically funny. They referred to Tybalt as the butcher of a silk button. Well, in the time period, there was a fight master who was famous for cutting buttons off of Englishmen's doublets, an Italian fight master who was famous for cutting buttons off of an Englishman's doublet, and he became known as the butcher of a silk button. So these are all contemporary references to the time. We, in this period, 500 years later, don't understand them. And when you look at 2,000 years later, who in their right mind would think that we would understand it fully or get it in any way, shape, or form? You know, that's why there have been edits and adaptations and manipulations and translations for thousands of years, and there's not one Bible that's the same as the one before. It's because it changes throughout time. So none of them are valid. We can go through and we can learn. That's why I say, you know, if you want to live in a loving world, then read the loving parts. You know, but the reality of it is if we could throw away all the books and all the religions, we'd have half the problems in the world. You know, because suddenly it would be less about we're fighting over our ideology and trying to make our caliphate and trying to, you know, make us a Christian right-leaning country. You know, it's all religion. It's all religion. And they're all based in 2,000-year-old books that nobody fully understands. And so I think we ought to throw them away. I think we ought to come back to just loving one another. Take the teachings of all of them. My religion is simple. My religion is kindness. Be kind. You know, he who knows not kindness has no faith. Be kind. I leave you one commandment, love one another. Be kind. Love one another. I just quoted the Dalai Lama, the Prophet Muhammad, and the Bible, Jeshua, right? And so when you look at this, it's the Bible itself is so misconstrued and are being manipulated daily by different people trying to push their specific points of view. I've met people who've read the Bible and come away thinking that all the disciples were gay. I met people who read the Bible and come away thinking that the most important people in the Bible are the women. I think that no matter what you're reading through your goggles and with your agenda in mind. And I think the Bible itself and many of the other texts were written with agendas in mind. And when you look at they've gotten written with the agendas of the time and the contemporary words of the time, and now, years later, we're trying to decipher it just like Shakespeare. And we can't. In Taming of the Shrew, Grumio says he's 3 and 20 a pip out. 3 and 20 a pip out, right? Now 3 and 20 a pip out. What is a pip? It's a dot on a dice. 3 and 20 a pip out is a reference to a game, but it was also a reference to being drunk. And so he was literally saying 3 and 20 a pip out. When I directed that play, Grumio would say he's 3 and 20 a pip out, right? So that the modern audience could catch this tipping of liquor. But you would never have gotten it. And you might have interpreted it an entirely different way. Because it's 500 years old. The Bible is 4 times that old. So it comes back to the idea that we should just throw them away and just start loving one another. We should come back to that space of just being love and letting go of the interpretations. People ask me all the time, what's this mean in the Bible? What's that mean in the Bible? What's this mean in the Bible? I'm going to give you my interpretation of it. But really, I think that we're at a point now where we need to stop doing that and just start loving one another. And that's my take on this whole thing. I think we should throw the books away. And the argument between Dan and this other guy really proved to me that none of it's valid. Because Dan's saying you can't believe your scholarly work because it's 100 years old about this work that's 2,000 years old. it's all moot in my mind. So, I will continue to watch Dan McClellan because I find his work utterly fascinating. I also find his work utterly validating because he keeps reciting these things, and concepts are ever changing, and he's always saying scholars don't agree. So that's my thought on this. You guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. See ya. Bye.